What's happening in the canine industry? For all the latest news, views, and expert opinions, stay right here for the Canine Paradigm. You'll hear from industry leaders, experts, doyens of the industry, learned colleagues, movers and shakers, and the odd randy guest. Get the latest insights and expert advice from both here and abroad from the people in the know. Now, here are your hosts, Glenn Cook and Pat Stewart. And I'm Lofty Fulton, and I'm out of here.
Hey, I need to tell you something.
Oh, God, what is it?
Some time ago, we did an ad episode where we talked about how we were going to get better with our ads.
I was wondering where you were going.
Yeah.
We're so shit at the ads.
That's what we said. We said, we're so shit, we're going to get better, and we just didn't.
We don't. We're so full of shit. All right, well, here they are. We got 5 sponsors currently.
All right, who are they?
First is the OG, the Einzer Wiener.
Oh, that knob.
The bullfed.
Yeah.
No, he's the OG. He's been with us since the
good.
start.
No, he's good.
He
He's
is
good.
going to
He's a
sell
good
you
boy.
whatever you need.
Yep.
He'll get it. What you should do is contact Jason from Einswick Dog Queer with some peculiar product, tell him you want it, and make him get it in and sell
Yeah.
it to you. Even if you could buy it somewhere else, just make sure he gets it in for you.
Just make that bastard work.
But in all honesty, I'd say 90% of my shit comes from him, and it's all the best stuff.
I did see some feedback on our forum where somebody was really intrigued about your handler package, the one that you got from Jason. Obviously, it works.
Yeah, it's
people
good.
are paying attention to the
Yeah, the
ads.
leashes
That's
are good.
great. Even though we're shit at this, we do a terrible job of actually trying to keep things updated. It's great to see that the people who are investing in our show are actually getting some leeway.
Yep. Mate, I've heard that your wife sells some canine products.
My wife is doing great guns at the moment. I said before that she's been supported terrifically in the United States, which has been good, but I will swing that back home and say that so many more people in Australia are doing it. And it's great to see, like, there are people finally in the sporting dog world who are starting to prioritize nutrition for their dogs. And I know them. I can see them when Narelle comes in and says, oh, guess who bought some product off me for the first time. So
Are you saying there's no patient confidentiality?
no, there's
You're
patient
aware-
confidentiality.
Oh, sorry.
It's just a
purchaser
mailing list.
confidentiality.
Well, it's a mailing list.
Are you aware my dog is taking pee, collagen, and what's the other thing he takes?
Antonol.
Antonol.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been on that.
Antonol is not Narelle's business, but I've got to do a shout out for Antonol. They are absolutely fantastic. They're very supportive of our show. Whenever we've done seminars and so forth, they have been first to dip their hand in their pocket. They are very generous with their product. But let me just say, all that aside, their generosity and their advertising and marketing, let me just say on the other side of that, their product is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, it does work. It's very beneficial.
For sure.
It's one of those things where they say Antonol for every dog every day. I totally agree with that. Narelle has even supported that. When people have asked them about her product, she says the 2 things that I would absolutely give to you is Antonol and her Gut Protect formula.
Yeah, right.
Gut Protect is like her holy grail of
Like
her
the
whole
flagship
range.
of the range.
This is not me market talking, okay? Because
This
we
is
are
an ad.
This is an ad, but this is not me doing marketing.
But we've already pointed out we're shit at ads.
I know. Of all the things that she sells, and she sells some killer product, but the one thing that she does sell, which I absolutely agree with her, every dog should have this product, is the Gut Protect.
Really?
100%. It's nothing that they need for being sick. It's something that they need to do just to maintain great gut balance.
Okay.
And gut balance is like mental health. It's one of those things that you absolutely want to get control around. So products like Antonol, great for every day. Gut Protect, great for every day. There's other products that aren't even related to hers called Rosehip Vital and stuff like that. Absolutely fantastic for dogs to be on every sort of day. But I know there's other people we need to talk about. If you want to learn more about Narelle's products, go to our website, canineseuticals.com. I think it's
This you'll figure it out.
it's .com or
Canineseuticals.
.com.au. It's one of those.
No one
but-
types that shit anyway. Everyone just Googles it and
Yeah,
then goes,
just Google it.
yeah.
You'll find it.
Hey,
Yeah.
George Kittredge, I reckon we should get him on the show.
We should have George Kittredge on the show.
Yeah.
Not only is he devilishly handsome,
Yep.
but he's got a fantastic, one-of-a-kind product that I've never seen replicated anywhere in the world. You and me were getting a car ride by him. We got to see the prototype firsthand.
And then his bike got stolen with the prototype on it.
It did.
Remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. But anyway, George has Rowdy Hound Dog Box. And
Yes.
so it's a crate that goes on the back of your motorbike so that your dog can go everywhere with you. And
Yeah.
it's cool as shit. It's a great idea. You should
Yeah.
totally get one. Tailored Canines in Canada.
Yeah,
Do you know that Taylor from Tailored Canines is hosting Jazz Whiting later in the year?
I do know that. Yes,
Yes.
I saw the ad. Very good.
Yep.
Not
So-
only is she doing great stuff with her tailored canine,
Her training business.
her training business, but she's also getting a fantastic trainer over there to help with her tailored training.
She is. And finally, Barbara de Groot
The sugar mama from the Heart Dog
From the
Training.
Heart Dog Training.
Just fucking throws cash at us.
Just supports the show. God bless her.
Yeah. I think later on in the year when Narelle and I are over doing a seminar with Melanie Benware, Barbara de Groot is coming over.
Wonderful.
I think she has put down a like, and I said, you better come, sugar mama, and she gave me a thumbs up. So hopefully she's going to be there and I can give her some love to repay us for all the kindness and support that she's thrown at us and ask nothing in return.
All right. That's our ad.
Yeah.
That one's good to go for at least another 4 years. You'll hear from us then. Welcome back to the Canine Paradigm. I'm your host, Pat Stewart. I'm joined today by my co-host, Glenn Cook.
Hello, sir.
How are you?
I'm well. I just had the extravagant Michael Ellis over here for a seminar. I was hoping that we would try and get some time to sit down with him. However, the moving parts just didn't work. You had a mock trial on in Northern Rivers in far north New South Wales and just didn't play out that way. But nonetheless, I'm sure we'll reconnect with him in the future and have a chat about everything. He did a remarkable job as always. 3 days down here. He did 3 in Melbourne, 3 here, and he's doing 3 up in Sunshine Coast this coming weekend. But he's an incredible artist at what he does. He just has this remarkable flow technique where he can just keep sailing through any given topic that he's talking about and carry it. Like he could literally talk probably 3 to 4 days just on one topic alone and just carry that topic the entire time. So you can really see that he's a true master in his delivery and his storytelling and how he connects all the dots. But while he's doing that, he still uses real world techniques as well. So it's not just that he's talking about a theory. He's actually proven it, that he's worked on his own dogs and countless amount of other students and their dogs as well. He's a very engaging person. I really enjoy being in the presence of people like Michael, good teachers that do have that patience with people and really have that eloquence in their delivery technique. It's quite a skill.
Mate, he was staying at your place and you guys spent some time together before and after the seminar. So keep your private stuff private. But at the seminar, what did he say or do that someone with your level of experience and knowledge just went like, oh, wow, holy fuck? Was there a moment like that?
I don't think I'm at that stage where I've really had a lot of holy fuck moments in training. It's not so much that anything is remarkably new anymore. As part of the conversation, when they're connecting the dots for people, it's the way, this is a compliment to Michael, the way that he connects the dots with everything. He's just got this incredible flow state where he can carry everything through. Like the entire story makes sense. Like even if he's talking about the end of a chapter like you would in a book, let's say, for example, you talk about the conclusion of the book and then you say, oh, but now I don't know what the story is. And some trainers, their delivery sometimes can be a little bit of a train wreck because they just don't understand how to make the story make sense of that. But let's say, for example, you had a movie where they showed you what happened at the end. And then in the movie, they replay it back and tell you how it got to be that way. Well, that's what Michael is a master of. He can he can start it anywhere in the chapter, the conclusion, the middle, or right at the beginning, and he can marry it all up so it makes total sense to anybody sitting in the audience. So he doesn't leave anyone behind or leave people there scratching their head. That in itself is probably the most impressive thing that he can do. He doesn't confuse people and he doesn't alienate people throughout the conversation. He creates this atmosphere that when you're looking around at the audience and how everybody is enjoying their journey on learning, they're all nodding their head together and saying, yeah, I get it. And if they're not quite up to speed on it, he allows ample question time that people can talk to him so we can engage them one-on-one while including everybody else in the atmosphere to say, all right, come on the journey a little bit. Let's go a little bit deeper into that because it warrants more understanding. If you might feel that way, other people may feel that way. And I feel that while we're trying to learn our way through life and we're explaining or gathering information to impart this onto students, I feel that that's a real masterful technique. And you're very much like that too, Pat. Like you have a great way of gathering a lot of people's information. I've spoken to you about this in the past where you have taken information that I've thought that's a little bit hard on the ears from certain mentors in the industry, just the way that they break it down. It's very understandable to them and they use a language that sits well with them. But a skill set that you've got and Michael have got is that you can create this into quite an easy to digest story. It makes far more sense. So it's more appeasing to the listener's ears when you hear it and you think, yeah, that makes sense to me now. You know, like I was struggling with the concept of it before, but now that I've had somebody like chew it up and macerate it around a little bit and then recreate it and then build this structure that's very user-friendly at the end of it, that's what I like to see from teachers. I really feel that that's what the teacher owes the student is comprehension of their given subject.
Yeah, I think that's Michael's greatest strength is that he helps people turn knowledge into understanding. I think that's the key, right? Where it's like, yeah, here's a bunch of info, but I'll package it in a way where you know how to store that, right? Like how to actually use it in dog training.
And it's a lovely delivery system too. Like he just carries it through. I think one of Michael's greatest strengths overall, which I've said in abundance before, but it warrants saying again, is that he's a true human being. Like there is no fakeness to Michael.
Yeah, what you see is what you get.
Exactly. Like he carries that through his entire life. I think part of a criticism of mine is there's a saying in the industry which says never meet your heroes, because sometimes you can meet them and you figure, oh, this is all the show. You're not that real person. Like you're actually a bit of a Michael's not like that at all. When you spend time with him, he's very genuine through and through. Even when you were talking about the private stuff, like just hanging out and so forth, Michael makes everything a fun and a teachable moment. Like if he's interested in birds, like we went hiking, we went to visit Birdie O'Sheedy up in the Blue Mountains. She's got a beautiful spot up there. And she said to Michael and Carol, because his wife joined us on the journey, she said, there's this place I want to take you guys to. It's one of my meditation spots, but I really would love to share it with you. I'd love you to see it. We went there and it was absolutely fantastic. But all along the way, anything that he was interested in, he didn't just keep that to himself. He shared it with everybody. Like if he looked at some flora and fauna of Australian natural habitat, if it was something that he knew about, he would talk about it with the group. Or he'd ask Birdie and say, do you know much about this? Like, what is it? And we kind of have a moment where everybody got to enjoy that moment together instead of like just being ostracized, like, oh, you don't know anything about this or you probably aren't interested. It was a moment where we all got to sit around together and learn a little bit of what was actually going on, which I enjoyed because I thought, like, I'm not really a naturalist sort of person. I don't really go out of my way to learn about bird species or flora and fauna. But everything along the way, anything that Michael's learned or anything remarkable that he thinks that would be interesting, he shares it with people and you think, fuck, this is actually pretty cool. Like I didn't know that about how birds see their plumage or different things together like he did last time. That in itself just shows that he's actually a genuine person. It's not like, oh, I'm just here to do a show for you, bro. And in between, you know, like I just want to chase chicks around or get drunk and basically cut you out or anything like that. He's an extremely rare person where there is no chameleon to him. There's no multiple faces. He's just a natural person. It never changes. And that's why I said it's a rarity. I know that I've got certain masks that I wear in front of some people, but it's kind of like he doesn't have the ability to do so. It's refreshing because you kind of think, oh, I don't have to be on guard around this guy. I don't have to hope that he's pretending to like me or that he likes me or anything like that. He either likes you or he doesn't. He's just that type of person. But he's a wonderful person, talks lovely to everybody. Carol came along as well, and yeah, she's a lovely person as well. So we had an incredibly bonding moment. As always, Alex did a lot of heavy lifting getting all this together, Alex Edwards. So I'm very appreciative to him as well. It was a great experience. And as always, I know you understand this as well, but having all the old faces back, the professional seminar attending group, they come out to up their education, learn, put themselves on display, bring their dogs out. I'm so appreciative of them. And it was so good to see so many good people as well, like people I really enjoy the company of, that, you know, we can have chats or learn a little bit about them. And it was great. So very much appreciated people's efforts. Always good to see that dog training community come together instead of people sitting around stewing turmoil and hating on each other. It's nice to be in the company of people who are real professionals and who are really driving this industry forward.
For sure. All right. Well, that's the circle jerk of Michael Ellis.
Yes.
Let's get into the show.
Indeed.
So we asked for questions a while ago and we're going to be working through them for a little while. So this one comes from Frank Guido. It says, how important is reward placement to you and your style of training? When I first got started, I obsessed over the best place to keep the reward in the beginning stages of training to achieve technical mastery in physical appearance. Yet, the longer I'm doing this, it seems the importance is found in the delivery and follow-up play. Glenn, what do you think?
I think it's very important when you're in training learning phase and you're using direct reinforcement, where you're placing your reinforcers, whether it be food or ball, that has a huge carryover effect on where the position of the dog learns to be. And in those early foundational criteria.
Well, as I read his question, see, I think because I was about to answer in the same way, but as I look at it, he's distinguishing between reward placement and delivery. So, often we talk about reward placement and delivery, and those things sort of end up fairly conjoined when we talk about it. What Frank's asking specifically here is placement. And then he says that he potentially has put too much emphasis on placement in the past and is now more focused on delivery, right? In the way that it goes to the dog. I think, first of all, we probably need to tear those things apart and talk about, like what's the difference between those. I kind of think about in terms of reward placement, the first layer of that is like direct versus indirect reward, right? So like, is the dog in pursuit of the reinforcer of the reward in order to, while pursuing it, accidentally or on purpose does the behavior. So like luring, for example, right? Like every form of luring is a direct reward because the dog is following the reward.
It has
in
to
an
be.
attempt to get the reward, we bring it into the behavior. Whereas an indirect reward, where the dog has to either know or assume or hope that it's there, it may or may not know what it is or where it is, but it's doing a behavior in order to hear a mark, in order to earn a reinforcer. So at that point, it's much more operant, that we would say. Like when a reward delivery is direct reward, of course it's operant in that moment, but it doesn't have to do a lot of thinking. It's more of a classical process. Like it's just following the bouncing ball. I want that food. You have it in your hand. I try to get it. You move it around. I end up in a particular position and then you give me the food. Whereas like the more operant process, like of course that's an operant process, but a more operant process then is that the dog is like, okay, I want that thing that may or may not be there. I want to find the work that has led to that being delivered in the past. That's how I sort of, in my own mind, frame those two things quite differently, because a direct reward is not necessarily about making more likely. Well, it is about making more likely something to happen that you're making happen because the dog is going through the motions of doing it. But an indirect reward is, in my opinion, although we can absolutely use it in a training phase, like in a very early learning phase right from the jump, and especially if you're shaping, then you're essentially doing this. But it's much more in line with the true definition of reinforcement, in that we're relying on the reinforcers of the past to make more likely the behaviors of the future. And so with an indirect reward, we're then saying to the dog like, hey, I may or may not have food or the toy or whatever in my pocket. I'm going to ask you to do something, or I'm going to give you the opportunity to act in a particular way. If you act in the correct way, then that will result in the delivery of this reinforcer. Whereas, the direct reward is like, if you follow this well enough and precisely enough, you will end up in the position that gives it to you. So that's how I sort of separate those two things. And I think that you can go much deeper into those, but I think as a jump off, as a starting point, I think those are the first two categories that I break reward placement into. Does that gel with your terminology around those things?
When you're talking about direct reinforcement, you're talking about something that's very overt. It's out there. It's seen to the dog. The dog knows it's there. It can see what's on display. It knows what the ultimate reward actually is, and it knows what it's working for. And as you were stating before, during teaching learning phase, that's essential because the dog doesn't actually understand the behavior. So fundamentally, we need to shape the behavior to teach the dog what it is that they're actually going to do. And without having that direct reward out on display, the dog goes, what do you want me to do? And in the early days, when I first began training, when we were very compulsion heavy with things, we were using indirect reinforcement in the teaching/learning phase, but we were using compulsion to actually shape the behavior, like pushing the dog in position, using a lot of negative reinforcement, so putting pressure early on the dog and then relieving pressure. That was one form of reinforcement, and then you would produce the reinforcer after that. as an example on indirect reinforcement at that point in time, that's how you could say during that training cycle, that's how we could actually use it to contradict what we were just using before, if that makes sense. But these days, I'm less inclined to do that unless I've got a dog that doesn't have like a very high prey drive. I have a client that can't find anything that the dog is super motivated by. It's just reluctant to take food other than when it's super hungry. And people say, oh, yeah, but you just wait those dogs out. I'm telling you, you don't get the opportunity with all these dogs sometimes. With some of these dogs, it's just impossible. And unfortunately, there are dogs whose lives are literally on the line. You know, like people just say, I'm not liking this dog at the moment. I don't like the fact that this dog doesn't seem to want to engage. It has no real drives at this point in time. It doesn't really understand anything. It doesn't seem to be able to learn anything. And that's because traditional methods are failing that dog. And that's like, you know, like I know we're going a little bit away from the topic, but this warrants talking about.
That's the point of the show.
It is the point of the show. When you make this relatable to how students work in a classroom scenario, some students are very proficient, like they understand exactly what the teaching model is all about. And therefore, you'll find that those students are high-ranking A students or high-ranking B students, like they get it, they understand it. But if a student has anything like dyslexia, or some sort of inability to learn in that sort of class environment, or doesn't understand the teacher, or is afraid of the teacher, or is afraid of the schoolroom, or whatever it may be, you'll find that that student will be either a D or an E student where they're just failing the class. So in order to prepare for that student generally needs to be in a more isolated environment, or an environment that's more conducive to how that student learns and how they pick up knowledge. There's still been situations now where people have come to me for lessons. They've been to lots of other trainers. They've said, you know, like I've had trainers, they've tried this indirect reinforcement technique where they're trying to lure the dog around or picking out the favorite toy. And yet we'll sit in there in the shed in a very isolated place, let the dog have its social and habitual time where it gets to sniff all the smells, walk around, do a wee, drink some water, relax, do whatever it can do. And yet you still find this dog is just not engaging the same way a normal dog would come in. Like a normal enthusiastic dog would come in, usually find a toy that it had some sort of relationship to, or it has food that the owner brought with it that the dog loves. But there are dogs that just don't do that. So in those sort of situations, none of that's going to work anyway. We just go straight into using a guidance-based technique, because if you say compulsion, everybody's head starts fucking spinning and they projectile green vomit all over the place because they just don't understand what they're talking about. However, for those who do, guidance is compulsion. We're compelling the dog in the position, gently, of course, but it is negative reinforcement. So the dog is experiencing a small amount of pressure. The dog then gets to relieve the pressure, and then we reinforce the dog. So effectively, we're reinforcing the dog twice. We're taking the pressure away, then we're giving the dog a reinforcer. Sounds like something that we all know. In that criteria, hopefully, when the dog gets more confidence and starts to understand, I'm a player in this game, I understand this, it increases the dog's aptitude and knowledge to learn further. And then the dog is encouraged to be a participant in this, not just a passenger. And then they, you know, that confidence starts to pick the dog up. And then you find that the dog is more willing to be a participant in more learning. But then you also find that the dog then feels like, now I feel safe in this, now I will engage. And I find this with human students as well. Even students that I've taught on courses before here in the past, where some students will nod, but they're only doing that so they don't misalign with the group consensus. They'll just nod as a falsehood. And this is the art and the structure of a teacher, where the teacher really needs to say, teach it back to me. What did you learn? You know, in small incremental sessions where you can sort of do a review on what the lesson's been all about. And you can say, can you show me what that actually is? And then that's where you find the fault. And that's what students of dog training need to do as well. They need to not just progress on this to say, you know, like I've just got to run the lesson plan or run the program. I've actually got to do a bit of an audit here and find out, what does my student actually know about this? When you're talking about reward placement and reward deliveries, or the techniques and skills that you're actually trying to pass on to your student, you really need to make sure, does this student actually get this, or have I missed something along the line here? And what do I need to revert back to? Where in the criteria or the increment path do I need to make sure that I'm staging this back so my student actually has an opportunity to follow along with this? But I digress. I know this is not exactly what we're talking about, but it's important nonetheless.
Yeah, for sure. And like my personal obsession at the moment I'm always on these different spiritual quests. And at the moment, I'm obsessed with Hermetic principles. And the fifth Hermetic principle is polarity, right?
Mm-hmm.
What they say is that opposites are actually just varied degrees of the same.
Yeah.
And so we think that things at opposite ends of the spectrum are, grossly different. But very often, and, dog training is life and life is dog training. And so I relate everything to that. I think when I think about polarity, very often when you can have the same problem in opposite directions. You could have a dog that is not interested in some sort of positive reinforcement. Let's say just food as an example, right? Of course, if the dog weren't interested in food, we would explore other things. But for easy explanations, we'll just say food. You get one dog that's not interested in food. And of course, there are techniques that you can go through in order to try and improve the dog's relationship with food in the way that it would want. And on a long enough timeline, that's for sure something that I'm going to explore. If I have the time to do that, I am absolutely going to do that. But then also there's dogs, and I got one here with me right now, who really doesn't seem to take any pleasure from taking food other than is completely obsessed with the idea of doing it. And so he eats so fast that it's borderline dangerous. And it doesn't really act as much of a reinforcer because it doesn't, he's not necessarily, he gets so highly strung around food that he doesn't easily make correlations as a being a reinforcer. And so of course he does. And given the time, energy, and space, we can deliver that food in a way and bring the arousal level down, and we can work through all of that. But in the moment when you've got to convince a dog of something, when you got to train a dog of something, that dog that has no food drive and that dog that has extreme and sort of off tap food drive, the answer is kind of the same for both of them, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yep. Totally with you.
So food's not the answer. So right now, food's a background problem that we it's definitely a thing that we have to work on. But that's going to be a different part of our training. It's going to be a different way that entire sessions are going to be dedicated to that. But in the meantime, the dog knows stuff and needs to continue to function in the world. So the other training that has to be around this is not going to involve food. It's going to involve pressure. And in some instances, it might be spatial pressure, because typically our dog that has no food drive and isn't interested in it beyond eating just to survive, of course, that dog is not likely, it's not possible, but it's not likely that dog's going to be off tap drives in other directions either, right? So our form of compulsion that we're going to use on that dog is going to be sort of a lot of gentle insistence with that kind of dog. It's going to be like, no, this is how it's going down, and I'm going to wait until you do the right thing. I'm not expecting it to be flashy or powerful, but you're going to do it, because on my way to the session where I intend to try and increase the food drive of this dog, for example, at my place here, the dogs are kept upstairs. So I have to get them down a set of stairs. And so I can't just allow no training until we get down there and then to our training space, and then we're going to start playing games with food and building food drive. If you're new to me and we need to get the training going, there has to be training from the second you get out of your box until you get to the what we call our training space. But in reality, the entire building is the training space. So the type of training that is going to happen between where you rest and where you play is going to be very different to if you were already interested in the food, because I have to tell you this is an appropriate way to act and this is an inappropriate way to act. This is the way that I need you to stay near me as we go down the stairs. This is the way that I need you to act as you come out of the box. And so none of that is going to involve food, because the food is going to be later on. But the same then happens with our dog that's off tap with food, because if I give him the food, then I lose him, right? If he even knows that I'm carrying food, then his arousal level goes to the roof and I'm no longer really in the state of arousal that I want to use for training. So it's going to be, mostly pressure-based learning, but it's less likely to be gentle insistence, because that dog probably has a lot more going on. And so it's going to be more tools. I'm going to be using a prong collar. I'm going to be using a slip leash. I'm going to be using those sorts of things that I can, compel the dog into the positions. And what we often find is with those dogs that are really off tap, lots of drive and almost nervy in the way that they encounter the things that they want, right? Because they want them so much that they have a tentative sort of hesitation around them. Those sorts of dogs usually do really well under pressure. They usually are really comfortable and even more powerful when you take away a lot of their options and you say to them hey, you can't do all these other things. The only thing you can do is this one. And this dog in particular that I've got with me at the moment, that's how he lives. He loves that. The more tightly you constrain him, the happier he is, because he's like, okay, cool, because I make a lot of bad decisions. So the more decisions that you can make on my behalf, the better my life will be. I think that that's worth pointing out. And when we say, when we are talking about reward delivery and placement, is that the type maybe even goes above whether we're going to talk about indirect versus direct. That's strictly what we're talking about in terms of positive reinforcement. But making decisions about nature of reinforcement has to happen before that as well. Unlike that, some dogs, positive reinforcement's the way to go. And of course, with all dogs, our goal is to use all of the reinforcement that's going to give the dog the very best understanding of the behaviors that we intend to teach it, as well as the best, I won't say the best, maybe the right word is the appropriate mindset around the behaviors that we're asking for. Because, some mindsets that we want around behaviors are not overly exuberant. Sometimes we want a dog just to be like, oh yeah, this is okay, rather than like, oh my God, I love this, right? Like that's not always what we want from the dog is, oh my God, I want this. But making decisions about reward type probably is a decision that goes before reward placement. And then once we have placement, then we can talk about delivery. I think as well, in terms of reward placement, we talk, the direct versus the indirect reward, right? One where you're just trying to get it, and then just trying to get it brings on the behavior. And the other is I'm going to do the behavior in order to get it. I think that when we can then even break those into a bunch of different categories as well. And which one of those I would want to use would really heavily depend on the behaviors that I'm intending to teach. And so one of the things that I think is worth pointing out is that I think of all of the way that I would intend to use reward placement, the direct and the indirect, like as being a spectrum. It's so rare that I would ever just now these days that I would ever just go, no, I am doing direct reward, or no, I am just using indirect reward. Like that, it's so rare that I would ever constrain myself to either ends of that spectrum, because I think that real dog training happens in the nuance in between. For sure, there'd be times where I have a dog that I think is, say, for example, I'm going to shape something. I'm going to free shape something. So free shaping is an indirect reward. That's how it works, right? Like you go out into the environment, experience it, interact with it, be operant, do whatever, find out the consequence. And so, I'm teaching a dog to do something. Let's say it's to go around a cone just to pick a behavior. Now, the dog so much as breaks eye contact with me, I'm going to pay it. The dog looks at the cone, I'm going to pay it. The dog maybe even approaches the cone, I'm going to pay it. So that's a very indirect reward. But then also every now and again, if the dog were to go somewhere near the cone, I'd click and he'd come back to me, and I might give him one piece of food from me in that indirect reward, but then I'm going to throw another piece of food. And that second piece is going to be pretty close out to the job that I want him to do, because I'm not going to directly bring on the work because I'm shaping it. I'm not luring it. But if I want to get some momentum, like by the time you get that dog unstuck from you and get it actually leaving you and you get a few paces away, if you're in the indirect reward where they click and the dog has to come back to you to take it, now you've just got that dog back stuck to you again. You're just kind of undoing all the things. So in order to truly make it more reinforcing of the behavior that we're trying to increase the frequency and likelihood of, I can then change my delivery to be in a way that helps the next behavior happen. So I think that's kind of like how I feel about Frank's question. He says, how important is reward placement to you? I say it's super important. It's super duper important, but I'm not getting too bogged down about deciding it has to be one or the other. I think in every repetition and in every moment and with every dog, I'm going to be making decisions about that. I'm going to be choosing which is the reward placement that is going to help me the most, which is going to give me the most chance of success of creating the behavior that I'm looking to create.
That's great advice. During the initial part of your conversation, when you started talking about polarity, as you were talking about that, magnetism was sort of sitting in my mind's eye. Mm-hmm. You can have two poles that are exactly the same, a plus and a plus, or a minus and a minus, and they will repel off each other. But magnets generally find a way to make each other work, to bring that attraction back to each other. So they have a plus and a minus, which will adhere to each other, like they'll snap together. I've found that with relationships with people and in dog training before. Like you can have something that's at either end of the spectrum, but for some reason, if you allow it to work, you will find that you'll get this cohesion that will make it come together. So yeah, I agree. Like there is a polarity in that as well. And just to jump on the end of that conversation there, I think this is fundamentally why it's so important that we do ongoing auditing, is not to become stuck fast in a particular mindset of this is how it has to be. And this is primarily why I've said to everybody in the past when they've talked to me about this, it's been words to the effect that have been uttered to me in the past, and it still does in everybody else's way, is use what works. Like if it's not going down the line, like it doesn't look right and it's beyond you, well, that's time to reach out. That's time to actually get yourself some mentoring to say, I'm trying this, but unfortunately it's predictive in the wrong way. Like now my dog is doing, a correlation of unrelated behaviors. It's modified to a point where I'm not satisfied with what the outcomes are. Like I don't like seeing this with what's going on. It doesn't fit my sport. It doesn't fit my lifestyle. It doesn't fit my relationship with the dog. Like what have I done wrong? There have been multiple times where I've done things like this before. And even, like still with teaching dogs now, with teaching Mando and so forth, I have to make sure that I'm auditing the progress of what he's doing, because I will get fixated on thinking, oh yeah, Randy learnt like this, so this is the template that I'm going to layer in over the top of him. To a large part of the equation, it works. It works just fine. But then he has his own little idiosyncrasies that come out and his own maturing pathway where I start thinking, nope, that's not going to work for this Rottweiler as it did for my very extremely high drive German Shepherd. And he's more sensitive. There are different considerations that I have to be mindful of. Otherwise, I'm going to insist on doing it a certain way or using a certain principle, and it's going to have a catastrophic effect, because even that 1 degree of indifference at the beginning is like 30 degrees of indifference at the end of the program, because I've been insistent on saying that's how it's got to be. I just run the program that way, and that's how it's got to align. And that's where I find that we have those come to God moments. If you're open to it, you kind of think, okay, please, Divine Spirit, give me the knowledge. I need some help here. It's just not coming together.
Yeah. The last thing I had to say on reward placement today, anyway, is I think as well you have to be really careful, depending on what you're intending to teach the dog and the style of how you're teaching it. But I think you do have to be pretty careful that your reward placement doesn't become a criteria of the behavior.
Yeah.
And I think that we see that quite a bit, and especially say in people who are teaching competition style behaviors. We could use heeling as an example. People that have the ball under their armpit all the time, like that kind of thing can really result in the dog not actually understanding what's even being asked of it when the reward isn't available to it. And so one of the catch cries, it's one of the things that I sort of harp on about all the time when I'm teaching this stuff, is that in almost all behaviors, definitely not strictly all of them, but certainly in most, if you want to call your dog trained, whether that means you give it the freedom that you want it to be able to have in its pet dog life, or it means that you think you're ready to take off all your equipment and enter the competition field, if you want to call your dog trained, you have to have, for the most part, gotten to that indirect reward. The reward placement has to be indirect, because otherwise the dog's not going to do the things, right? And so in pet dog terms, that means that your dog's not going to recall, in an emergency situation when you're not flapping the Smackos bag around. Like we've all seen those people that have to first hold up the bag, rattle it, and then get the dog to come back, because there hasn't been a circumstance where any time that they haven't done that prior, that the dog has come back, that it's actually been paid. And then similarly, we find that as well, like with the ball under the armpit. We certainly see a lot of dogs that like enthusiastically enter the heel position, look up and go, hey, you don't have the ball there, so I've misunderstood this heeling position. We've never done this before. And so, of course, there's a learning path to all these sorts of things where the presence of the reward as being a part of the behavior has to be faded out so that the dog then, and I think what we see a decent amount is that people will have the reward and it has to be present and visible, and the dog needs to know that it's there. That becomes signal one. And then signal two can then be, the other way around. That becomes the sort of the starting signal. And then signal two then is the dog saying, you giving the name of the behavior. And the dog goes, okay, well, the conditions are in place whereby I see that you have the thing that I am going to earn from having done the behavior. Therefore, when you tell me to do the behavior, I'll do it. And that's kind of how we get into that. Like, I suppose at that point, it's bribery, right? Like, I suppose that's the issue at that point, is that you're then saying to the dog, I'm leveraging this over you and you have to do it in order to earn it, rather than maybe I have this. Why don't you find out whether I have it? And that's going to cause that variability in the dopamine spike and therefore the enthusiasm in the dog, and allow you to build that into a variable reinforcement schedule where sometimes you don't pay the dog, right? And sometimes you then ask for sequences and chains of behaviors and stuff like that. So I think that's what's really important to remember in reward placement as well, is that just be careful that the reward placement doesn't become a necessary criteria of the behavior. Doesn't really matter what behavior it is or what reward it is, like specifically what the thing is that you're giving. If it's present, then it can, if it's present and visible to the dog, then it for sure becomes like a precursor to the behavior. And maybe without its presence, the dog won't do the behavior. So that's why for sure I need to get to the indirect reward in almost all behaviors, not all, but almost all.
It also highlights that there's often an issue with the relationship between continuous versus intermittent schedules, because what they're doing is they're staging apart their incremental levels, especially when they start drifting into intermittent schedule reinforcement. What I see people do, and I've been guilty of this in the past, is when we're starting to cement the behavior, like we've gone through that beautiful continuous schedule, we've started to develop an understanding. So we've gone through that nice criteria of learning with the dog. Then when we're saying, now I'm going to start indirectly reinforcing you and I'm going to introduce the intermittent schedule. What I have done and what I've seen people do before is, instead of layering that back and gauging everything back to say, let's take this right back to bare bones because I'm going to start something new with you here. They go, okay, you should know this. Instead of taking one step, reinforce the dog, they'll take 5 steps and they'll reinforce the dog. But then the entire position that they wanted the dog in, the dog has drifted out of it. But they were so fixated on stepping it out rather than watching the dog, and the whole auditing system starts falling apart. So that's where that's another process where I find people make a difficult process out of it, because they're thinking ahead of the program instead of running the program the way it deserves to be run for the sake of the dog, not for the sake of the teacher.
I think that relates, heavily to the idea of one criteria at a time, right?
Exactly.
So, like, you've built the behavior the way that you want. And almost certainly in the building of that behavior, there would have been an element of direct reward for the most part, right? Like
absolutely.
very few people are completely indirect reward right from the jump, right? So there would have been an element of direct reward in the learning phase before you go to the intermittent schedule of reinforcement, where sometimes you're paying, sometimes you're not, you're building chains of behaviors. A step prior to that would be changing the reward placement to be indirect and trying not to do those two things at the same time. For a couple of reasons. I think when you do two things at the same time and it doesn't work, then you're like, okay, well, which step didn't the dog understand?
Yeah, right? That's right. Yeah.
Like, was it just one or the other, or was it the combination of the two? Like, have we created a cocktail here? So, like, that's one of the reasons why I like to do one thing at a time, for diagnosis purposes.
Yep.
But also just because it's easier for the dog to understand, right? Like, and you're not trying to take too big a jumps. And I feel like, again, it stems from just talking about reward placement, but when the motivation is correct, the dog will, for the most part, do whatever it understands is the thing to do in that moment, right? Like, that's the point. It's why they're so trainable. We act like we're incredible because we can train them to do fancy things, but that's like the whole fucking point of them, is that all we actually got really good at, like all the really best trainers are just really good at motivating their dog and then communicating a little bit about, this is what I want you to do in order to earn the thing that I can motivate you with, right? And so when the motivation is in check, chances are the dog's going to do what you're asking. And when they don't, it's either a motivation issue, which is a problem for later if this isn't a training session, if this isn't real life. Where
or
you
a communication issue.
Yeah, or the dog doesn't get it. And so you got to be like, okay, like back to trying to figure out how to use this motivation, how to communicate to you what is the thing that I want you to do in this moment. And so I think that keeping all of that in mind allows us to be fairest, or as fair as we possibly can be, to the dog and for the dog. And I think that's one of the best things about training with that negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement, and the way that we draw those learning pyramids and all that kind of stuff. It's one of the things I harp on about, is that when you've got a learning phase of negative reinforcement and another learning phase of positive reinforcement, so the dog understands pressure into the behavior and then positive reinforcement out of the behavior, when you eventually one day ask that dog to do the thing and it doesn't do it, because of course that day is going to come, if you then apply some pressure to the dog and it does it, then you know, okay, you had a motivation issue, right? Because the dog didn't want the positive reinforcement enough to do it. And so you had to follow up with the negative reinforcement, which the dog understood and then did it. But if the same situation arises where you've used negative reinforcement into the behavior and positive reinforcement out of the behavior, you ask the dog one day to do it, doesn't do it, you apply pressure that has in the past worked and it doesn't work this time because the dog offers some other behavior or, whatever, then you get to diagnose right there in that moment, oh, he doesn't get it, right? Like I'm back to the learning phase, because if he knew it, he would do it, right? Because I'm using the full spectrum of motivation.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the coolest things about modern balanced dog training is that none of us these days should find ourselves in a position where we say, he knows this, why isn't he doing it, right? He knows this, he should be doing it. I find myself saying to people constantly when their dog isn't performing the way that they expected and they get frustrated, I'm like, hey, slow down. Like he's interested. He's with you. The dog is bought in on this session. He's attempting behaviors. They're not the ones that we want, but he's doing stuff. He's not checked out. So the motivation is in check. He doesn't understand because he's searching for the solution to this problem. What we actually need to do now is take a step back, remove whatever criteria we can, narrow it down to help him actually understand what the solution to the problem is, rather than just, compelling him harder, right? Because the motivation is there. He's trying to turn off the pressure. He's in pursuit of the positive reinforcement. Now we need to actually really look at this through the lens of explanation to the dog, where we go, no, you know this elsewhere, man. You just are missing the whatever has changed that you don't no longer understand it. Let me explain it to you in another way that will assist you in understanding it properly.
Yeah, I left you 4 steps ago and now you're not enjoying it anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've been in situations like that myself where I've been involved in either a group discussion or a learning opportunity where everybody else is pushed on and I'm 4 steps behind them. Now I'm feeling the pressure of it because I'm thinking, I don't enjoy this anymore. I'm not part of the conversation or I'm not part of this learning practice. If you make it relatable to yourself, then you get an idea of what you're pushing your dog through sometimes and those pressures that you can put your dog under. Because as you said, I think that was really well put, that the dog does want to be here. The dog is motivated. The dog enjoys the learning platform that you've created until you move beyond the dog, because you were just thinking, well, I've just got to push the lesson plan now, regardless. I'm not sticking with my student. I'm just pushing on. That's a fundamental crime of teaching, is that teachers aren't auditing their students enough to find out, where did I lose you? What part didn't you understand? Like, actually, instead of me asking all these questions, why don't you tell me what you understand and then we can catch up from there? And I think that that's a process that anybody that's teaching, and even though you can't have a verbal discussion with the dog, you can go back and do a show me what you understand. Not tell me what you understand, show me what you understand. If the dog still doesn't understand, you aren't there yet. You have to go back and gauge back to a level where the dog goes, oh yeah, I understand that. I can do that. And then you can say, cool, that's the catch-up point. This is the crossroad where we deviated the path, and now I need to reconnect that and remove that path that the dog was going down, because that's an incorrect layer. I need to layer it back or recombine it so we're both heading in that same direction together.
Yeah, it's so rare that a dog just suddenly gets lost, right? Like, if you're in a session and suddenly the dog doesn't know what's going on, like, and any time that actually happens, I think usually that you've overloaded the dog in that moment, like where the dog is performing and then suddenly isn't. Usually in that instance, it's too much information at once. The dog can't process it all and they just kind of shut down. Like we see that even in the highest drive, smartest, most capable dogs. You give them too many decisions to make, the decision they make is none. That's why we kind of focus on the biting so much in so many of the sport and the real world working dogs that we have, because when they get overwhelmed, probably the answer is to blast someone, right? Like that probably is what's going to solve the problem for them. So we want that to be their bias for action. But we see that a bit in that dogs just kind of, if they get overloaded, they just stop. It's like the spinning beach ball on your Mac. Like there's too much processing going on here. It's too hard for me to make any decisions. But that's super rare. I think what we see much more often is when the session starts falling apart and the dog's not doing what we expected of it. The indicator that was coming was a long time ago. And it was because we glossed over a minor error that the dog made, and just because we wanted to make progress. And we forget, I think, sometimes that progress is reinforcement. So if the dog has sort of a sticky out, doesn't do it very well, but you just kind of work through it and you keep going, then you reinforce that out. Like if the dog's out is sticky and you don't like it, and then you ask for another behavior and you pay the dog with the same tug or toy or whatever for having done that behavior, then the crappy out was reinforced because it got to do something else that earned the tug again the next time. And so outing, as an example, is one of the rampages that I'm on at the moment. Like I feel like I'm nonstop fixing outing issues with dogs, and I love it because when I'm teaching or I'm at an event or someone brings a dog to me or whatever, often they come out with like, I want to help build some stability in the down or something like that. And I'm like, okay, cool. Just warm the dog up. Show me what you got. And the dog's not clean and precise in its out. So then I'm like, okay, well, we're not touching the down. Like that's where the problem is. The reason that your dog is not stable in the down is because he's not clean in the out. And so we have to build that. It's little increments. And so, as I say, when the session goes wrong, it's usually because people have a goal where they've decided, okay, I'm going to, by the end of this, have done 10 reps of whatever it is you're doing, right? Like make an example again, they're going around the same cone, right? So I'm going to have got to that point. But what maybe should have happened is that the dog did something else along the way and it didn't go well, but you just managed the dog through it. In reality, you probably should fix that issue, because then even if you do get your 10 reps of going around the cone, that knowledge and understanding of going around the cone is built on a really shaky foundation because it was difficult to get there.
Yeah.
So for me, like no matter what my actual goal is, if I'm on my way towards that goal and one of the key things that I need in order to achieve that goal doesn't work perfectly. And the best example I can think of is the out, right? Like if my out gets sticky mid-session, now this is an outing session. That doesn't mean that I don't continue making progress elsewhere, but I'm not going to even attempt it until my out is perfectly clean.
Yeah.
And what can happen, especially with some of the more linear thinking dogs and the higher drive dogs that put their blinders on and don't see anything other than what's happening right in front of them. Sometimes when you're teaching them something, if you're rushing towards teaching it, a condition of being able to do that thing can be the rushed process. So you can find with some dogs who only understand the thing that you're trying to teach them, if it involves the bullshit that they got into in the learning phase along the way. So you see a dog that you're going to teach, for your bite work example, you're going to teach to be guarding, but the dog is now like shitty in the heel because you keep sending him to the guard from the heel. Well, now when you have that dog super precise in the heel and you send him to guard, he's not likely to do it because he's more likely to bite, because that's how, like, from really nice heeling, only ever biting has happened. And in our process of teaching him the guard, if the heel kind of fell apart because you were sending him from that, he maybe doesn't understand even how to do a guard from a tight heel. He has to be preparing his mental state in that looser situation. So it's just making little decisions like that along the way about like foundational skills as you progress.
That's a good point. And it got me thinking on when we start talking about relaxing criteria when you're teaching new criteria. There's a difference between relaxing criteria and corrupting criteria as well. And that's what people have got to be in the mindset of. And again, guilty as charged. I've done this before where I've been so rushed because I think, well, I'm on the field. I don't make anywhere near these mistakes as what I used to make. But I used to think, well, I'm here. So it's, like as we used the example before, and we've done a topic on it called run the program. And I've just think, well, I've got to run the program. I've got to press the button. I've got to build this criteria. But it's at the peril of my student. It's more for me than it is for my student. And that's the reverse way of doing things.
Yeah.
As I've told students in the past, you can't paint over untreated rust and expect it not to be a problem later on. If you don't treat that problem, it's going to come up and you're going to see it again. It's just going to come through the paint. So it's the same thing with dogs as well. If you don't treat that problem, if you don't go back to it and think, I've got a rot problem here, I've got to sort this out, it's got to be cut away, that's not relaxing criteria. That's damaging criteria. That's actually making a problem and then thinking, I'll mask over that and I'll fix that later on. There's very, 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 very few dogs or people that can deal with that. In fact, I would say just don't do it altogether. Address the problem, go back, fix it, make sure there is no corruption, make sure there is no rot, cut it away, and teach a student how to fulfill it. Because that sort of stress to a dog, it's fucking terrible to a human, but it's terrible to a dog. Like to be able to the aversives forced upon the dog is a definition where the dog doesn't understand the relationship between you and it anymore. Now it starts questioning, like, who the fuck are you? I thought we were in this together, man, but we're clearly not. You're dragging me along on your game now and you're having a good time, but I hate this. And then you find it at a later situation. And as you said, in biting dog sports, this is where dogs just defy you. I would actually retract that and probably say it's not the dog defying you. It's just that the dog doesn't understand anything else and it's looking for an alleviation to all the stress it's feeling and just thinking, I need to bite someone. I just need to unbottle all of this anxiety and stress that I'm feeling because I just don't understand this situation. So I need to manage it in any given way that I possibly can. When you're judging sports, you can see or when you're training and when you're a training director or when you're just going through the motions, you can see plenty of dogs where this happens, where they just think, I just don't understand this anymore. I've just lost my way. So I'm just going to try and deal with this in a way that I can actually try and regain some way of feeling good. Because right now, all it is a pool of aversives.
I find it really helpful having kind of like a window of opportunity for the dog that invokes learning. So Jazz and I sort of, we call that like a shaping window. And sometimes that is as clear as shaping in that there's no leash on and you go do whatever you want and you just find out the consequence, right?
Yeah,
like
just bring it back to basics, shaping. Like make it fun. Yeah.
But also, whenever we're teaching a dog something new, I like to try and be able to bring the dog into that state so that they feel really free to make mistakes, right? Like, because that's, I think, one of the most challenging parts when you're trying to add some new complex behavior to a fairly highly trained dog as is, that you're trying to maintain the behaviors that the dog has and don't let those slip and don't let them take shortcuts and those kinds of things, but also keep the dog's mind clear and open enough that it will experiment, that it will take risks.
It's controllable behaviors, right? So the dog understands, like the dog feels empowered. Like if I make a mistake, it's actually inducing knowledge. Like the dog goes, oh, I know why this happened now. Like I have control over this. I feel like that's very species orientated as well. Like if you give any species the option of controlling their outcomes, like they know why they missed a reinforcer or they know why they're getting reinforced and they have control over the mechanism and think, that makes sense to me. Now I know how I can avoid this stressful situation happening and now I know how I can induce the option of getting more of this because now I have control over it. When we're talking about the skills and the arts of good teachers or mentors, that's really what they want to empower their student to feel is like control over the situation. Like I know why it happened. It's not just that this is happening to me or I'm the subject of punishment or reinforcement. Like I know why it's happening. Like I have knowledge. I'm in the moment of it.
Yeah. All right. I reckon we've answered that one.
Yeah, cool.
We've probably got time for one more, right?
Yes, we have.
So this one comes from Marissa Armony and it says, what would cause a dog to be grippy on a tug or wedge with a handler, but firm and calm with a decoy, and how to solve it?
Many of those same reasons that we were journaling through what we just talked about.
Yeah.
I find that sometimes there's been dogs of mine before. For example, Harley was generally a good biter with other decoys, but he was soft with me. Like I could never gauge how hard of a dog that he would bite with me because when he bite me, I think, oh, this bite is like pretty soft, like it's good. The grip is good. It's full. It's deep. It's right to the back molars, but it's a soft bite. Where other decoy, like if I transfer that onto a decoy, they'd go, oh, fuck, man, I can feel him all the way through the suit. Like he's really power biting into me. Like he's not going for the linen. He's actually going for my flesh and it hurts. Like he's biting really hard. And I'm just thinking, are you a wuss or am I missing the point here? But that was my early introduction into that. So in those early journeys, Harley felt an obligation not to bite me hard. Like I hadn't really invited him to do that well with me. What I taught him was, don't bite me hard. I'm the boss. And I'd already frequently lorded over him like I'm the supreme one here. I'm the most powerful one here and you're not entitled to do that. Whereas other dogs that I've had in the past, they've bit me with every bit of energy and power that they possibly can. So when I'm teaching my own dogs how to bite, where to bite, target, and so forth, when we're just doing it in fun, predatory manner, and I've realized I've got to understand when I'm teaching the dog to do this here, I've got to take a lot of the stigma away about our relationship and just let the dog enjoy the moment and not feel intimidated about doing this. Like this has got to be a fun moment. It's like when you watch a father or an uncle teaching their son how to box or their nephew how to box. You can't then tell them off because they've hit you hard or anything like that. You've got to go with it and you've got to say, wow, that's awesome, man. Like you're doing some hard hits there. You've got to teach them how to do it and how to have respect in the sport that they're actually doing it. And that's the entire obligation then falls on you as the teacher to make sure that you explain properly the rules of the game there. So, like they aren't biting dirty, they aren't biting up towards your fingers, you're not inducing all these problems that are going to affect the dog down the path. And I find that the issue there is a lot of people who are teaching these games early on with their dogs are unskilled to do so. Like they haven't gone along to a mentor and had an experienced mentor who's raised whatever amount of dogs in this sport or this game. They haven't had the opportunity to sit with that person and say, how do I do this? How do I play with my puppy? How do I avoid the issues of teething issues where, like I'm pulling too hard on a rag? Because that could be the problem as well. It might be a teething issue that you've had with the puppy where its journey all the way up in teething was fantastic. This dog was having, like a wonderful history with you. Its bite placement was fantastic. Its targeting was terrific. Then suddenly it was a teething issue where the dog had a couple of sore molars or sore canines, and you were tugging away on that rag because you weren't thinking about it because you weren't prepared for it and you'd never raised a dog for a sport or anything before. And now suddenly the dog has an aversion to it. And it might just be with you if you're lucky. It might just be that, the dog now thinks, I don't like playing this sport with you because I recall the last time we did this, there was an aversive moment. It didn't feel good. I didn't enjoy this whole process. Whereas with the decoy, there was none of that. With the decoy, it's all appetitive. Like the decoy brings on fun. The decoy doesn't tell me off. The decoy doesn't make this a problem where I feel like it's a lose-lose situation. With the decoy, it's all fun. Like this person really invokes an appetitive outcome the entire way through.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the specific of the question says, what would cause a dog to be grippy on a tug or wedge with a handler, but firm and calm with a decoy, and how to solve it? So the cause is without a doubt conflict. Like that's it. You can put a full stop after that.
Yep.
But better to think of that as a heading and then be like, okay, but there's a lot of different subheadings under what kind of conflict it could be. Yeah. So it could be conflict that the dog, you get some really serious dogs that, bite ferociously on a decoy because they're trying to kill that decoy. Like they're in the true predatory chase sequence and they are in the fight. They are actually trying to kill their prey.
Yeah, they're locked in.
And so, and then when that hopefully, like that should never point back at you. So
yes, that's a good, very, very good point.
Yeah. So you might get, you could do everything right and be a fantastic handler and trainer and playing with your dog and everything. But just because of the personality of your dog might mean that because your relationship is so good, he doesn't want to go to that place in his mind and therefore doesn't display the same kind of gripping behavior. So, it could be that. The opposite could be true as well, in that it might be that your relationship is shit with the dog and therefore the dog is in conflict with you the whole time and is like pissed off about the way that you play and is not gripping as well as he does on the decoy because he's unsatisfied with you, right? So it could be that not just that he's more satisfied with the decoy, but it could be your techniques. I think as well, technique probably plays a big part of it. What we see is that most people who, especially newer handlers, most people will only have 2, 3, 4 dogs, in their whole time in dogs, right? That's a pretty common thing that most people will only have a number of dogs they can count on one hand that have been their dogs. But if you've got an even halfway decent decoy, he's training that many dogs a day, right? In doing the bite development stuff. So what we see as well is that a lot of handlers really only get 1 or 2 shots to actually become good at playing with a dog or to learn a dog or to understand how a dog thinks, moves, feels, because you only get to really get in the head of your own dog. Whereas a decoy, and this is why I encourage so many people to get in the suit or to learn the pointy end, and I find myself saying this more and more and more to people, is that even if, some of the feedback we get is that, we cover a broad spectrum of the market or the industry. Like people who listen to us, everything from fairly enthusiastic pet dog owners who just have their own random dog all the way through to professional trainers in the bite sports and everything in between. And so some of the feedback is often that we talk a lot about bite sport stuff, but I encourage everybody to try and build as much power in a gameplay with a dog that is, with as many dogs as possible. And all the people that come to me and say, hey, how do I learn how to decoy? there's no one around me that, like I don't have access to a lot of working dogs. I go, okay, what do you do in the dog space? Oh, I'm a dog walker. I'm like, fucking sweet. You got 4 dogs an hour that you can learn to play with, because as a decoy, that's really all you're doing is really just a particular style of play, but you got to learn how to play tug with a dog. That's really all that's happening there, right?
Yeah.
And so it's never surprising when a dog has a better grip on a decoy than it does on the tug that it plays with the handler. Is probably one of the reasons for that, for sure, could be that you as a handler just don't have the skill as a decoy. And that's only through experience, right? And so you can improve for sure and get advice and watch what your decoy does and emulate some of the stuff to try and match the grip styles of the dog. But for sure, that's a path to explore in order to get better with dogs. It's just playing with as many dogs as you can and trying to play tug with as many dogs as you can, because essentially that's all the decoy's doing. And then when we want to sort of explore it a little bit further, when we talk about, why is the dog grippy and weird on the tug versus not on the decoy, is I think then there can be some inference issues, right? Or like deference issues, I should say, where, sometimes, again, it's all just conflict, but sometimes because of the way that you have had your out of the game interactions with the dog can cause this as well. So, you might do everything perfectly in the game, but just the way that the dog interacts with you day to day can cause those sorts of grip issues. And because they don't interact with the decoy day to day, then they don't have any cause to have those sort of interactions that leads to that. The other one could be the way that you taught the out as well, right? So a lot of the times we see people, like the handler teaches the out, and a lot of handlers get pissed off when their dog doesn't let go properly and correct things in a way that is often not helpful to the progress. And again, chances are your decoy is of a higher skill set, because that's what we find, for the most part, when you go to any clubs, speaking generally, one of the best trainers are very often the decoys there. Like if the club has good decoys, they're not just a random guy in a suit. Like usually that decoy is usually the best trainer or understands dogs the best. They might not be handling the dogs that much, but they're going to be one of the best understanding of how a dog thinks, feels, and does things. And in a lot of training, it's going to be your decoy who teaches your dog to out properly off of himself. And so while you're going to teach that off of a toy, and there's going to be conflict and sort of all kinds of shit involved in the teaching of that, because at some point, there's almost no way. There is ways if you're going to go down the sort of reflex response style path, which is worthwhile doing, but there's almost no way to teach an out without some amount of conflict coming into that learning phase, because you're taking something from the dog that the dog wants, right? So there is going to be a small amount of conflict, but some, that has to be worked through and then patched up on the other side. But some people create quite a large amount of conflict. And typically, if you've got a really good decoy, you're going to have taught that out on the toys, and then you're going to use that out now that it works, or you've got it going. You're going to use that out of the decoy. And depending on your style, but the way that we typically do it is the decoys teach that final part of the out so that the handler's not involved in it, right? So like the decoy is going to be driving the lines and locking up and doing all the things to have the dog really understand it. And chances are they're better at it than the handler. That's why they're the one doing it. And so you maybe helped develop that conflict in the teaching of the out onto the toy that you had, but then your decoy was much better at repairing that conflict. So he repaired it himself into his own relationship, but you have not been able to repair it yourself into the toy. So that's kind of all, not all of them. There's probably even more if I sat down and thought about them, but the reason why a dog would be shitty in the grip on the handler and really nice in the grip on the decoy is going to come down to conflict. Conflict is going to be the answer. But again, there could be lots of different reasons why that conflict has arisen, and getting to the bottom of that is going to give you the solution.
One of the areas too, which correlates to your points about that significant area of conflict, is that some people unintentionally and sometimes intentionally invoke defensive drive when they're trying to do this teaching. So, like they'll try and rattle their own dog's cage, which is absolutely a big no-no. It's something that, has got to be taken off the table. This is something that a specialist or a decoy, a trained decoy, an experienced decoy only does with the dog. So drive channeling is something, it's fantastic. Like if a experienced decoy, somebody at the club who actually knows what they're doing, if they can channel between defense and use predatory behavior as a reward at the end of that, when the dog is showing those, you're harnessing those big feelings. And when I say that, it's in a safe manner where the dog is displaying it correctly, this is where the experience of the educator comes into the forefront, where they really need to understand when I'm bringing these big feelings out, I'm not trying to put too much doubt or conflict in the dog's mind. What I'm trying to do is show the dog you can be very powerful, but be very real in this experience, and then I can reward you through prey. So first and foremost, the decoy needs to understand, does this dog have a good degree of prey already? So let's say I've got the dog back tied or in a frame for argument's sake, and the dog's got a decent grip, but I think I can bring this on better by channeling the dog into a bit of defense where the dog is going, oh, this is a little bit more serious. This is not just playing a little game here. What I want to do is make the dog feel like, yes, you're making me feel a little bit of hostility towards you now. And then when I can see that dog is coming out and showing me real raw strength and power, then I can I can stop it. I can switch out from one mediated feeling of the brain into an entire different mediated feeling. So I can switch from the dog feeling a little bit of hostility or maybe a lot of hostility into the dog now channeling through prey. Generally, when the dog bites you there, you can feel an increase in how the pressure of the bite will actually be. When I've seen people trying to do that with their own dogs, it always goes badly. It either rattles the dog where the dog just thinks, this isn't normal, man. Like, this isn't a normal relationship. Like when I used the example before, like teaching a kid how to box or anything like that, that's like teaching a kid how to beat you up, and then, like curb stomp you while you're down on the ground. Like those sort of things are just radically stupid. And yet people still teach them. I had a client years and years ago. He had a Doberman. He was bringing it down to club, and the dog had a significant bite for a Doberman. It was a really old school, old world Doberman, really, really good biter, like terrific biter. It would bite as well as any of the other dogs down there. And I'd get the dog along the way, and every now and then this guy, the handler of the dog, wouldn't show up, and there'd be like a 2 to 3 week gap. And when the dog would come back, his bite went from solid, intense, deep as the dog could possibly bite, to then the dog being nervy, the grip starting to shift. The dog would move between a 4 bite to a 3/4 bite. And I kept saying to him, is there something changing in between here? Like, I know we haven't seen each other for a while because you've had work on. The guy was involved in security. And I said, what's changing here? He goes, nothing. No, I don't know.
I see where this is going already.
Yeah, the only way that I found out that there was something going wrong, because the dog was conflicted with me, which was never the case. Like, I was the dog's original mentor and brought the dog up in bite work. Now, this dog did apprehension bites, and it was a real dog. It was a very real dog. Its channeling between defense and predatory behavior was absolutely sensational. However, I'd start to see these anomalies surfacing after breaks. It was only when he brought down a colleague, a guy that was working with him, that was telling me that he was making the sleeves that we have down at the training, and he was making his own ones out of carpet and trying to teach the dog himself, like back tying his own dog and putting the dog into such a state of conflict. So when the dog came down, he was showing me surefire signs that he was very, very uncomfortable with the scenario playing out, and he just didn't understand what was going on. He settled back into it because he realized, oh, you know what this is, and you know how to make me do this well. So I said to the owner of the dog, all right, so here's the deal, man. I said, if you continue doing this, it is absolutely pointless of you coming down here and working with me anymore. And I said, I'm not kicking you out, but what I'm telling you is everything that we're building together, like if I'm building a brick wall and you're kicking bricks out of the bottom of the wall, that wall's going to topple, man. At some stage, we're going to find that there is a corruption and that wall's coming over. So that's the analogy I'm using to what's going on in training here. And I said, because I'm doing everything I can to make this foundation solid and to build the structure on top of it, but you're hindering my progress by kicking bricks out of the bottom here. And I said, and this is what's happening with this dog. Like, he doesn't understand that he should be doing the same thing to you because you're his companion. You're his partner. You two have got to have a symbiosis, a relationship, as I do with the dog, but my relationship with the dog is very different than what your relationship with the dog is. I'm still a training partner. I'm bringing on progress with the dog, but you're there to back up and support the dog and show the dog, I'm in this with you. I'm fighting this bad guy with you. And I said, but then you show the dog, now I'm the bad guy. and you've got to treat me the same way. And I said, he doesn't understand any of this. I said, you can play with him for sure. You know, like you can use these reinforcement techniques when you're at home and, you know, like if he's doing good behavior or he's done well in the job or something like that, for sure you can whip out a tug and play with the dog and do all that sort of stuff. But then to be the bad guy, the conflict that's raging through his head, this is the reason why we're having this discussion, because I can see the conflict in him already. I can see it building. I can see what's progressing. So the rub to the end of that story is don't put your dog in a situation where the dog is in conflict about channeling defense drive with you. Let your training director, let your decoys do that work. All you need to do is work on their advice, build that relationship with the dog, and show the dog we're in this together.
Man, I tell you, something I've learned over the years, and I constantly have to remind myself of it, and it's like I think one of the most important pieces of dog training information we could ever pass on is on a training program with a dog and things are going well, like the trajectory is set and everything's going well, and then suddenly it's not. Step one is figuring out what dumb shit the owner is doing with the dog. Like it's because there's so many times I've been like, oh, what's happened here? Like, how's the dog not getting this? Why is this? And you're always trying to blame the dog. And I have learned just to, whenever anything that isn't what I thought was going to happen happens, or when I'm surprised, step one has to be take a step back and open a conversation with the handler to figure out what they're doing that caused this. And most of the time they don't know, right? So like it's sometimes they're keeping information from you. Of course that happens, but a lot of the times they don't know. Like, and everything from the dog acting strange, turning up completely tired. Like I've had a dog just completely burn out within 30 seconds of a session. And I was like, what the fuck? Is the dog sick or something? Like, oh no, he was just on the MILF before you arrived. And it's like, okay, well, that wasn't
cool beans.
Like, that's not a great idea, right?
Yep.
Or we were at the beach all day. Like, okay, well, that's probably not a good use of the dog's available energy for the day.
Or he was sick all the way up until the lesson and he's finally come good today.
Or even like, the grip suddenly falls apart and it's like, okay, you're putting all the work into it and then they tell you that the dog's been swinging off of a swing pole, right? And you're like, okay, we figured this out. Or targeting problem, like everything. What I have learned over time is when things don't go the way you expect it to go through experience and having done it plenty of times in the past, when something derails, it's time to enter that conversation with the handler and be like, tell me about your day-to-day with this dog.
Exactly.
What has changed, right? Because it's almost always the case. And most of the time it's ignorance because they just don't know not to do that. And you have to approach that. I think that we as trainers that know these answers can often be we just expect that people should know that and they don't, right? And we forget, we've been at this a while, you forget how fucking shit you were at it to start with and the dumb things that you did when you didn't know any better. And so I think that giving people the benefit of the doubt and saying like, hey, I think you might be doing something stupid. Let's not call it stupid because you don't know that, right? But you're doing something that is causing this and we need to get to the bottom of it.
One of the pitfalls of mastery in anything is that you forget what it was like to be a beginner.
Yeah.
Unless you're constantly revisiting that yourself. Like you look at it, and we have touched on this topic before, but this is where people utter the words, oh, that's easy. Well, it is easy at your level. It's not easy when you're at a beginner level. But to circle back to what you were talking about before, there's a couple of principles where I find that it affects overall training, and that is if you're not doing enough, that can be as detrimental as doing too much. And I generally find that not doing enough is not as bad as overdoing something because, ultimately we're trying to find that flow state in the middle or the Goldilocks principle of just right. But again, if you haven't explained to your student, the person who owns the dog, the owner of the dog, what it is that looks like just right, well, all they're doing is mediating their way through life with their dog and thinking, this is normal. This is what I probably should be doing as a good owner with my dog. I should be running my dog on a mill. I should be running my dog down the beach to get the dog trial fit or build the dog's fitness or to socially adapt my dog to any sort of situation. Whereas what your job as the training director is not just to say, okay, let's just skill build through the dog. You've got to be invested. You have to have a total investment in that dog's history to say, this is what your week with the dog's got to look like. My boxing coach, when I was a kid, he used to say, what are you eating, Glenn? Like how many Ks are you jogging each day? So he had a very set principle, like he'd say certain amount of protein, certain amount of vegetables, certain amount of natural sugars and so forth. You got to drink this amount of water each day. You got to do 5Ks run up and 5K run back every day. You can only have one day off a week and you can only have one cheat day, but the cheat day's got to look like this. Because he just knew, I'm a dumb fucking 17-year-old.
You don't know any better.
I don't know any better. So at 17, I don't know any of that process because I go home and go, yeah, fuck it, I'm going to go and smash beers all weekend with my mates. He'd say, this is the discipline for meeting this end criteria or these end goals. This is what you got to do. This is the lesson plan, but not only the lesson plan for arriving in the gym or the dojo or the training center with the dog. This is what you got to carry out a little bit throughout your life. And if you're unprepared to do that, don't expect the big rewards or the big goals at the end. And this is why when we see athletes in dogs and in people, these people who take the cups home, take the medals home, achieve the big kudos at the end of it, the sacrifice that's gone on through the entire program of their coach setting up scenarios for them to run through, the handler doing it, the dog doing it, or the athlete doing it. Like there is a lot of prep work to do it. So being a training director isn't just spending 5 minutes with the dog and go, all right, well, let's just go through the bite work. The training director's role really is to integrate into their lifestyle to say, you need to be doing these things in order to achieve that. And if that's got to change, that's got to change. And here's the reasons why. Because it's not only a learning moment for the dog, there's a lot of students here. The handler of the dog is a student. The people at the training center watching the progress, they're students as well because they're thinking, oh, fuck, I hope I don't do that stupid thing with my dog and end up fucking it and having the training director upset with me. And there's been many times where I've seen you pull the whiteboard out at Iron Fist and say, all right, guys, we're not training practical tonight. We're training our minds. Like we're going to work through these principles. That has to happen. Otherwise, people get left behind. People don't understand. They don't get time to answer the questions because, you've only got small windows to come together. Everyone's busy. Everyone's got things going on with their life. They've got family, got their own dogs to train. But if you do have those little pockets together, that's the time to ask the questions. That's not the time to disappear up the back and say, oh, I'd better not ask this question. I'll be made to look stupid because I don't understand this as well as the others. What you got to do, whether it's a Bite Sports Club, whether it's a group training session for just normal obedience, everybody's got to come together and hold each other's hands a little bit at that stage and say, if we're progressing as a team together, like we're all showcasing our skills together, if that's what we've got to do, we've got to make sure that the strongest link and the weakest link both have some form of cohesiveness.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we answered a couple of questions. The next one's a bit exciting, so I feel like it might be a whole episode in it, so let's wait until the next one.
Yeah, we're at the end of this one.
A man has used the word deprivation, and so we'll have to explore that one a little bit.
Yeah, cool.
But for today, that's it for another episode of Canine Paradigm. As always, if you like what you hear, like, rate, share, subscribe, do that through whatever subscription service you download us from, and then just go to another one and do it there. If you want to support the show, the best way to do that is to jump into Patreon. A few bucks a month gets you a giant backlog of information in there. But the reality is you're keeping the show going. You're buying our equipment. You're paying our bills. You're keeping us being able to make the show. So that big thank you to everybody that's into our Patreon there. Huge thank you. One of the things that we have in there is a massive discount on my online course. So if you're interested in that, you could get into the Patreon. For $3, you could get like a $200 discount. That's
very generous. Very cool.
You could pay more if you're in there as well. You could always buy us a Lamborghini, even if it is Lego. They're appreciated.
How's that going? How's the Lamborghini construction going?
It's half built.
Yeah, nice.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah, cool.
Cars are hard. Cars are really hard.
There's a lot of moving
I shouldn't even infer that I'm doing it. It's my 9-year-old son that is slowly ticking it over.
Yeah, cool.
All right. And then if you want to get in touch with us, the best way to do that is to jump into the Facebook discussion group. It's called the Canine Paradigm Discussion Group. There's lots of we group source information in there. A lot of really cool discussions happening. It's a network of people who have, for the most part, agreed not to be dicks to each other online, which is
nice.
If you want to be a part of that, jump in there. And if you want to get in touch with us directly, you can shoot us an email. We are info@thecanineparadigm.com.
Yeah.
All right. That's it. I love you. Goodbye.